So good evening. I'm Lawrence O'Keefe with Friends of the Napanee River. As with all of our winter speaker series, we're proud to have partnered with Friends of the Salmon River. I'd like to hand over to Susan Moore, the president of Friends of the Salmon River, just for a few moments. Susan, over to you.
And now for a word from our sponsor. I bet you didn't know you're going to have to sit through a commercial from Friends of the Salmon River. So what we are, all I wanted to show people is that the Friends of Salmon River just finished our photo contest. And so the slides you're seeing up are the 4 winners of that contest. One was the People's Choice, which was the big community vote. And then the other 3 are one was land and waterscapes category, one was flora and fauna, and one was people and activities. So these are the 4 winners of that contest. People all said they had a lot of fun with it. And here's the next one. And so there are we look to local artists to find some prizes for our contests. So the one was in the top left is ceramic leaves, which are actually created from leaves of the Salmon River. One's a stained glass, one is a big photo book of the Salmon River, and then the People's Choice guy got a 1-year membership in FSR. So basically, we just wanted to let everybody know it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot to everyone who participated, and we did get a lot of people sending in photos and participating in the community vote. And that's it for me, Lawrence.
Thanks. I'll see if we can flip back our screens here. There we go.
All righty.
Thanks. So here are the lineup of speakers and topics from our winter speaker series thus far. You can see any of our events this past winter by going to YouTube and searching for Friends of the Napanee River. Remember, all events are open to everyone, and you don't have to be a member of either of our groups to join in. Our final event for this year will be on June 8th, and we're honored to have Dr. Andrew Peregrine joining us. Dr. Peregrine is a well-known professor of veterinary science at the University of Guelph, the Veterinary College, and he will be speaking on his recent research on the spread of ticks across Eastern Ontario, how to identify infectious versus benign ticks, what you can do to reduce the risk of Lyme disease, and you'll provide some helpful resources if you're impacted by Lyme disease. So we'll be sending out a notice on that particular event actually tomorrow. As always, if you're interested in joining either of our organizations, you can join Friends of the Napanee for $10 a year by going to Friends of the Napanee River, as you can see here. Or alternatively, you can send a message to our treasurer at that email address at the bottom of that slide. Similarly, with Friends of the Salmon River, you can either go to the website and join for $20 individual memberships or $30 for a family, or contact Dave Johnson at that email address at the bottom of that slide. If you don't get any of these details, again, included in the notice that we send out tomorrow on Dr. Peregrine, you will see a link to the presentation, and then you can come back to it and pick up this information if you miss it. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the session, please use the Zoom chat function, and we will dig into those obviously at the end of Olivia's presentation. I'd like to hand over to Ted Darby, who's a member of our steering committee, to introduce Olivia.
Right, I hope everyone can hear me. So thank you, Lawrence. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Olivia Hughes. Olivia is the Stormwater Project Coordinator for Quinte Conservation. Her role is to support municipalities and other local stakeholders in improving stormwater management around the Bay of Quinte. She has been with Quinte Conservation since 2019. Olivia is a graduate of Queen's with a degree in chemical engineering. She has pursued additional training and certification related to green infrastructure. I understand Olivia is particularly passionate about technologies that focus on managing stormwater at the individual lot level. Olivia spent most of her life growing up in the Salmon River watershed, a short walk from the shores of Beaver Lake. So thank you, Olivia, for taking the time tonight to discuss this important topic. We look forward to your presentation.
Olivia, you can screen share at your discretion.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. Just there. So can everyone see this slide that I have up? Yeah, okay, perfect. I attend lots of Zoom meetings. I don't always run them, so bear with me. Yeah, so I'd just like to say thanks for having me tonight. I guess you got the full introduction there. Thanks to Susan. Thanks to Lawrence for inviting me. I'm really excited. So tonight, we're just going to talk about some tips to make your property rain friendly. We're going to just focus in on a couple and some, well, really one and some really practical ways to do it. But before we start, I always like to take a step back and think about why do I care and what's the bigger picture. So I like to start with a watershed perspective. And I know that the Friends of the Napanee and Salmon Rivers know a lot about this. But just a reminder, so what's a watershed? It's where all of the water is flowing off the land to a common source or a common outlet, like a lake or a river. So you could think of it like a funnel. And here's a nice sketch of a watershed from Conservation Ontario. I'm sure you've seen it before. And what I'd like to point out is that everything you see here is part of the watershed. All of the farms, all of the urban areas, our septic systems, our wells, they're all part of the watershed, and everything is connected. So what happens upstream impacts us downstream. And we really see that in our watersheds and in the Bay of Quinte, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So first, more on Quinte Conservation. We're one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. And our goal is to provide scientific advice and expertise on a watershed level. We have a lot of stewardship and outreach programs. We manage different conservation authorities, rather conservation areas that people can come and hike at. And really our overarching goal is to protect people, property, and natural resources in our region. So you're in the Napanee and Salmon River region, the Napanee region watershed, which has the Napanee and Salmon Rivers. It's about 2,000 square kilometers and drains to the Bay of Quinte. We also cover the Moira River watershed and the Prince Edward region watershed. So some of this may look a bit familiar if you've heard Maya Navrot or Mark Boone talk to you, but I love this illustration. If we could go back in time to where we live 200 years ago, we would see a lot of forests. At that point in time, about 80% of the land was covered with forests and lots of trees. If you flip forward to the middle picture, this is actually an aerial photograph of Belleville in early 1900s. So this is about 100 years ago, and you can see that we've cleared off most of that land, and a lot of it has been used for farming. So we've lost most of that forest cover. It went from 80%, I think, down to maybe closer to like 20s. And then if you look again on the right, the final picture, this is the same view of Belleville, shifted over just a bit. And this is about 30 years ago. And you can see that we really transitioned from this forest cover to this farmland to a pretty urbanized environment. But today, in our watersheds, we have maybe 25 or 30% of the land covered by forests compared to what we used to have. So what happens? What happens to the water balance is a big question. This is something I find pretty interesting to look at, is this illustration. So here is a natural version of the water balance. About half of the water, when it rains, will soak into the ground or infiltrate. A really good portion of it is either going to evaporate or be transpired by plants. I don't know why engineers like to put this in one big made up word, so we'll call it evapotranspiration. And about 10% of the water runs off. So there's this really good balance. It's really stable, and it's all happening because we have all of these trees, all of this forest cover. They do a lot of work to capture rain and capture precipitation on leaves, on trunks, branches, needles, to slow it down and to kind of keep it where it falls. So yeah, I guess I added some arrows here. You can see the big arrow here is infiltration. So most of the water, or a lot of the water, is going back into recharge our groundwater, and only a small portion runs off. So if we flip to our downtown water balance, you can see that this sort of pie chart has really shifted. Now, instead of having most of the water soak into the ground, we have most of the water running off of the ground, and really very little of it recharging our groundwater. But if you're from the Napanee or Salmon Rivers, you might not live here. This might not be your reality. So a couple things I'd like to point out. This sort of urban water balance really impacts water quality. That's a lot of what I get to focus on in the work I do, because stormwater has been identified as a significant impact on water quality in the Bay of Quinte. So we know that all of these hard impervious surfaces that we cover up the land with, there's a lot of contaminants that accumulate. Just thinking about, streets and parking lots and our driveways, there's a lot of sand and salt, rust, oil and grease, gasoline, any chemicals we spill, fertilizers, pesticides, pet waste. All of these things, if they are ending up on the surface of our watershed, they can end up in our water. So this is a bit of an in-between scenario. I guess this is a little bit more probably of what we'd experience if you're living in, Tamworth, Aaronsville, maybe upper regions of our watershed. So it's not the natural version where we had all these trees. It's not downtown Belleville, but there's still been this shift. There's some more runoff. There's less water soaking in. And so we don't get to kind of live this good life without having any impacts. If you think about what I was mentioning earlier, when I said we used to have about 80% of the land covered by trees, and now we're down to, I think, 30%, it really only takes maybe a 10% change in land use in a watershed before we start to see some pretty significant impacts. So what? I guess, what are these impacts and why do we care? So flipping back to this, where we are and our watershed, I'd like to point out again that the Napanee region watershed drains to the Bay of Quinte. And the Bay of Quinte has been designated as an area of concern by the International Joint Commission. It's been this way since the 1980s. Basically, there were so many impacts to our local ecosystem that people identified that this was a huge problem. So some of the issues were fish kills and loss of animal habitat and water quality impairment. So an overarching kind of issue in the Bay of Quinte has been excess nutrients. There's an excess of phosphorus that contributes to eutrophication and all of this kind of algae growth in the Bay of Quinte. And so some of that comes from these urban areas. So our sewage treatment plants, industry, urban stormwater. So that's a lot of the work that I get to concentrate on. But a lot of it still comes from elsewhere in our watersheds. We know that something like 23,000 kilograms of phosphorus come from the tributary rivers. So the Napanee, Salmon, Moira, and Trent rivers. And also that the mouth of the Napanee and all in like Hay Bay area is actually a phosphorus hotspot. So clearly even though we might live further up in the watershed, what we're doing is impacting our neighbors further down in the watershed. Kind of this everything that goes in has to come out idea. Something really interesting, I mentioned that there's about 23,000 kilograms of phosphorus coming from our tributaries. A really cool fact I picked up is that 1 kilogram of phosphorus can grow between 300 and 500 kilograms of algae. It's pretty impactful. So moving on, what are some more of these impacts? We mentioned a little bit about algae growth, or a lot about algae growth. Other things we see are erosion. So this could be stream bank erosion. There's also, I guess, maybe part of the problem is erosion from our land. Just thinking of removing lots of forest cover, removing lots of these protective surfaces, now a lot more soil is eroding and impacting water quality. So this is blocking out sunlight that fish and plants need. It's also carrying phosphorus, nutrients, and anything else we sort of put in the ground with it. Also, going back to the water balance, we see issues with water quality and water quantity. So on the left, you see all this cracked dirt. This is a photo I guess I found just thinking about some of the impacts related to drought. I know that, especially if you've seen Mark Boone's recent talks, you'll know that a lot of areas in our watershed are actually susceptible to drought. And so we're not necessarily helping things along when we're removing all of these natural surfaces and changing the landscape. So we need to live, but how can we maybe balance all of the great things that we get from living here and maybe reduce our impact a little bit? So another impact we also see, just before I move on, is flooding. So when we're having less water soaking into the ground, we're having more water running off. Often there may be more nuisance flooding, more flooding happening, sort of in the streets that our sewer systems can't handle, all of these kinds of things. So if we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about climate change, or even just some of the intense weather that we've seen in the last few years, we know that we're experiencing droughts. We know that we're experiencing some heavy storms. And we know, obviously, there's a history of us experiencing water quality impacts. So this isn't something that's this really big in the sky idea. It's something that is really impacting us. So what can we do about it? Often we turn to science or engineering to find our way out of problems. And I'd like to point out there's a lot being done. The Bay of Quinte Remedial Action Plan was formed decades ago to help work towards addressing these issues of water quality in the Bay of Quinte and of all of these habitat issues. Quinte Conservation does a lot of monitoring. We have a monitoring team that goes out taking samples and really assessing the condition of what's going on. You may be aware of the drought management plan that was just finished this year. So lots of effort, lots of people involved. But what about me and you? And what about the individual person? What can we do? So I really like this slide, this idea of thinking big and acting small. We want to keep that whole idea of our watershed and the big picture in mind. But we can control what we do and what we have on our properties. So realistically, let's think small. One thing we can do is make our properties rain friendly. A big part of the problem we just talked about is that water is running off really quickly because we've removed some of these pervious, soft, spongy surfaces in our watershed. We need to look for ways to slow that water down, to capture it, maybe to let it soak into the ground or recycle it. So we really would like to find ways to conserve water a little more and have a little bit less of a footprint on our surroundings. Yes, for the water balance, for the environment, putting water back into the ground can help with stream flow, but also for us, relying less on our wells and this groundwater that we know can be in short supply sometimes, and still having a nice garden or a nice yard or even vegetables to grow in the summertime. So we can be a lot more resilient to some of these impacts like drought, flooding, and all of these things. So we're going to focus on 2 ideas for your property, mostly on rain gardens is what I'd like to talk about, and then also talking a bit about naturalization. So what is a rain garden and how does it work? So basically, this is a nice little diagram of a rain garden. It is a sunken garden. So often if you build a garden, the bed of it may be built up. A rain garden is sort of sunken into the ground. It needs to have a water source. So typically we're going to take water from your rooftop, but it could be from another hard or impervious surface on your property. It could be from your driveway or a patio. Rooftops are nice because we have downspouts to easily direct water. So a rain garden is going to take this water. It's going to temporarily store it or slow it down and let it sink into the ground. Here is another diagram of a rain garden. So it's a little more technical, I guess, but you can see sort of some of the main points of how this is working. And you can sort of see actually that there's this depression or the sunken area in the ground, and that's where we can temporarily store some of that rainwater. If I flip back to the last slide, you can see that they sort of still had this depression, but in this case, they used a little bit of a berm. Here, they made this sort of sunken area, and that's really it. That's the main idea. Now we're just going to talk about how it all comes together. So the main points, you need to have a source of water. Where is it coming from? I love using downspouts. And you're directing water towards your rain garden, this area where we're going to slow the flow and keep it there and let it contribute back to this more naturalized water balance. So I love this little picture. I got this fact from Mark Boone's talk that we get about 3 feet or a meter of water falling in the bay, in our region every year. So just thinking about, a typical house or a rooftop, it doesn't take a lot. So 1 square meter of your roof or of your driveway is going to give you about 1,000 liters of runoff every year. So clearly, it's not going to take a long time for that to add up. All of a sudden, your 1,000 square foot roof, which is not that big of a roof, is giving us, 100,000 liters of water every year. Clearly, if we can capture that and make that work for us and be useful, we're kind of onto something here. There's a lot of it to be had. It can be a resource. So the essential features, we need a water source. It needs to be able to get into our rain garden, and then it needs to be able to get out of our rain garden, or at least have some kind of overflow. So we're not creating a pond in our backyard. I really want to stress that. It's more of a garden. We want to have a temporary area to store water, but we're really looking to add features to soak as much water into the ground and be as much of a sponge as we possibly can. So we need an inlet. This rain garden, when it rains, would fill up with water until it overflows, and then just follow a natural drainage path that it would have before. And finally, we use light and fluffy soils to promote infiltration. So we have a water source, an inlet, an outlet, and we've added some light and fluffy soils. And these are all of the main ingredients we need. So I talked quite a bit now about how it works, but you haven't really seen any good examples. So I just want to show you a few. This is a really beautiful rain garden. There's a program This 12,000 Rain Gardens logo you can see in the upper corner is from Puget Sound. This is a really well-established garden. Look at the beautiful plants. You can sort of see in the bottom left corner that they have some river stone. That's probably their overflow. I'm guessing that maybe they have a downspout and they buried a pipe from the downspout as their inlet. So this is a really great way that this person has made their front yard really attractive. And they're also finding a spot to put all of this excess runoff and really make it into a resource. Here's another example. I sort of like this because I think it shows you how simple it could be. I think that this is probably a really new rain garden. The plants really haven't grown in yet, but you can actually see some water in the bottom. I would say that this sort of stone that you can see is probably some inlets, and there's this little black plastic grate in the middle, which might be something like an overflow. So I guess they maybe have gone a fancy or kind of engineered route for some of their drainage there, but you can sort of see some of the key features. I also love this example because it shows people building together. I just think that's really nice. There can be a community aspect to it. I know that's pretty difficult right now with COVID, but if you're with your family or you're planning for the future, it can be really fun and really also a good opportunity to show people or teach people what you know. More examples. So this also seems pretty simple. I think if you compare this to what we just looked at, you can see that the individual design or shape of a rain garden is really up to you. It's serving its purpose by collecting water and soaking it into the ground. And after that, what it looks like is really up to your creativity and your preferences. So it can be your new show garden, or it can be your new naturalized pollinator area. It really depends. So this one's pretty circular. You can see that they use a lot of river stone here, sort of on the left-hand corner. And again, this is really an aesthetic choice that people just sort of like how it looks. Not that it does something special in this rain garden. We kind of got those three main ingredients: inlet, outlet, fluffy soils, and then that's pretty much how it works. Just a couple more because I really love them. This is obviously a really beautiful and really well-established garden. So maybe this is a few years after you plant it. And here in the bottom, you can see some river stone that they used for their overflow or for their outlet. Often you'll see people put some stone at the inlet or outlet to prevent erosion. So the idea is that a rain garden is going to collect your kind of average rainfall. So it's going to collect the small rain events. Let's say if you follow some rules of thumb for designing them, probably 90% of the rainfall in a year. That leaves all of the really big storms, the 100-year storm that comes along, or the 25-year storm, or there's a hurricane on the East Coast and now we're getting a lot of rain. We need spots for that water to go, and that's what they've done here. And then I kind of like this one also because they've used a berm, like I mentioned back in the beginning. You can sort of see how they've been doing that. Rain gardens require digging, which we're going to get into. A berm is a nice way to not dig as much and also reuse some soil. I've heard it been called the scrape and shape method by our friends at Lower Trent or at the BQ RAP. You don't have to dig so deep this way, so it's nice. You can also see in this photo, if you look back on that white building, you can see the downspout and then this little black thing, which I think would be like a downspout diverter. So it kind of seems like these people buried a pipe that comes from that downspout into the inlet of this rain garden, which is pretty neat. It's really simple to do. You can use Big O pipe. You can use like septic PVC, not hard to do. And I think it looks really great in your yard. So the next part of our talk is how you can do it yourself. Hopefully some of these last slides have given you a little bit of inspiration or maybe convince you on how nice a rain garden might be, here's how you can do it yourself. And I know we have a limited amount of time together, so I'll try to be quick and focus on the important parts. And I'm also, as I go through, I've included a lot of photos and references to some different sources of information. So if this is something that's interesting to you and you want to find out more, or maybe you want to do something a bit different, there's lots of information available, and hopefully I can point you in the right direction. So do it yourself. Here's what you need to know: how to choose a spot, how to size and design it, what materials you need to build it, what plants should you be putting in this, and then are there any special methods for building it? Starting with the site, I always wanted to say location, location, location in a presentation. I think I've seen a lot of house hunting shows at this point. But things to look for. So you're at your house. You're thinking, where's a good spot for a rain garden? We need a source of water. So probably it's going to be at least close to some kind of downspout or to a driveway or patio. You want it to be on a slight slope. So this is kind of goes with the point before it, which is having a route for overflow to drain. If you have a really, really flat area, it's sort of like, where's the water going to go? If there's a big storm, where's that water going to drain to if it has to overflow? So the things we need to think about. And the whole slight slope, this 5% rule of thumb, this is kind of to make sure it's working properly, but you also want to make sure you're sloping this away from your house. The goal is to make a tool that's going to help us and become a resource. We don't want to flood our basements. So 5% slope, what does that mean? If you're like me, it might not mean a whole lot. So some quick tips. Slope, if you can think back to grade 9 math class, maybe have been a while, is rise over run. So, and this kind of shows on this excerpt I took from this rain garden handbook. If you say went outside and you measured off a 10-foot line, and then you could see how far the ground dropped over that distance, you would divide the drop over the length you went. So say you measured off 10 feet and it dropped a foot, you have 1/10 or a 10% slope. So you can do this pretty easily if you get a string and some stakes and you mark off those stakes at different heights and put them in the ground. It's not super hard to do. I like to think that there's a couple of easier ways though, especially for me. I don't I don't really want to be running around outside scratching my head like looking at the ground. So a couple of tips. I am not a carpenter or a plumber, but a pretty good tip I heard is to use a level. Something like, I think a quarter bubble off on a level is, a quarter bubble off is a 1/4 inch over a foot. So that's about a 2% slope. So a half bubble would be a 4% slope, which is basically what we're aiming for. So if you have some, like carpentry equipment laying around, that could be pretty easy for you. And then another really good way, again, from our friends at Lower Trent, is the pitch test. So if you could pitch your tent, just imagine you're going to camp out in your yard. If you could pitch your tent and not worry about rolling away, it's probably fine. Other things to look for. So that was slope. Other things, it's good to keep this rain garden, 3 meters or about 10 feet away from your foundation. Again, it's just, I guess, some common sense. Like we don't really want to try to infiltrate water right by the foundation of your house. And then obviously this is really important, is somewhere that looks good, that you're going to like it. Maybe you want a privacy barrier between you and your neighbors, or maybe there's a spot where you're going to have some curb appeal. There's also some spots where you don't want to put it. This is pretty important for people who live in rural areas. Some of these considerations, we want to stay away from wells and septic beds. Again, we want to stay away from steep slopes. And Also, we want to stay away from utilities. So I think some pretty basic rules of thumb I found on the internet, always good to confirm though, is to stay 100 feet away from a well, to stay 15 meters away from steep slopes, which I guess would be about 50 feet. And so steep is like 15% or more. And the issue here is that if you're building this on top of or near a steep slope or a cliff or something, you could be making the ground unstable by oversaturating it with all of this water. And in the right conditions, you may end up causing, you know, a little mudslide or definitely some more erosion, which is sort of one of the things we're trying to prevent with our rain gardens. Another rule of thumb, keep something like 4 meters or 15 feet away from your septic system, or 50 feet if you're uphill of it. So another suggestion, and this is more my tips from hard experience, is to stay away from trees, because it's pretty hard to dig around or through their roots. And especially if you're trying to protect the tree and you're not trying to harm it. Yeah. So with all those in mind, it's good to take a walk around your property. I like looking at it from Google Earth, but taking a walk around and keeping some of these things in mind, you're probably going to find 2 or 3 spots where it might be good to have a rain garden. Then we need to think about how we're going to design it. So I came up with 4 rules of thumb here. The 10% rule, draw it out, the 34-inch rule, and the common sense rule. So I'm just going to go through those. Firstly, 10%. So I went on Google Maps. I chose a random house. This happens to be in Tamworth, if you know where this is. What I did was think about, okay, where's there a water source? So there would be a downspout coming off this roof. And let's say I'm going to choose to put my rain garden in the front yard, because I like how it looks. I want people to see it. I want my rain garden to be about 10% of all of the rooftop that's draining to it. So I went on Google Maps, and just looking at the satellite view, if you right click, there's a tool called Measure Distance. And all I did was click in a little square around that roof and found that that portion is about 300 square feet. So my rain garden would be pretty small, I guess. It'd be about 30 square feet. A very simple calculation. The more you have draining to it, the bigger it's going to be. Second is draw it out. So this goes along, I think you're really in this whole kind of investigation stage right now. You should be walking around your property. You should be looking at it on Google Maps and seeing it from overhead. You should go take some measurements and some pictures and think about how you want this to look. Like I said, as soon as you're following this 10% rule, that's your basic sizing. Now you make it whatever shape you want, however it's going to look good for you. I think that lines and like curved lines look great. Some people really like, you know, pretty regimented, pretty square gardens. It's really up to you. I recommend some grid paper. If you're anything like me, it gets messy pretty fast, and it's nice to stay organized. And you're going to want to mark off any key features in your yard. Anything that you're going to want to avoid. It's nice if you're looking sort of at the bigger picture and you know, okay, the septic's kind of over here, my well's over here. These are areas I want to stay away from. That can be pretty helpful for you to have later on. So here's some examples of people's different sketches. And I just honestly got these off the internet. So a couple tips, add some dimensions. Speaking from my own experience, and if any of you have ever built, baked, or sewed anything, you'll know that it pays to spend just a little bit of time taking a few measurements. Snap a photo, draw it out, and you'll save yourself a lot of frustration or, you know, running out of materials partway through, or you dug the whole thing and it was in the wrong spot. So highly recommend. It's also a good time to start thinking about where you're going to want to put plants and things. This is probably a pretty advanced version of a drawing or planting plan. Obviously, someone was using a computer to make it. But what I like is that they got pictures of all the plants they wanted to use. which I think is great. It gives you a real feel for what's kind of coming down the line. And I think it can make you a bit excited about it too, and really get imaginative. You're also going to have a good idea when you go to order or find plants of what you're going to need. So we just talked about where to put things, how to size it, so that 10% of our drainage area, and that we really need to start making a picture and a plan. Now we're going to talk about how deep do you build this garden. So I said that a rain garden is this garden that is a depression in the soil. But how deep is that? Well, we're not digging ourselves down 5 or 6 feet deep here. 34 inches is a pretty good rule of thumb. And that's if you're following this 10% rule. 34 inches is about 85 centimeters. And why do we even need this though? Well, we need room for our amended soils to go back in after we're done. And these soils are where our plants are going to grow, and they're going to provide storage area for this water. We need room for mulch. We need room for water to pond in temporarily. So here's what we're going to do with all of that space. The first 24 inches, we're going to put soil back. And I say amended soils here. We'll talk about that in a bit, but it might not just be, you know, the regular soil you put back in. I don't know if there'd be much point to your garden then. We're going to put in some mulch. The mulch is great, firstly, for cutting down on maintenance. It's great for not having to weed a lot. It's also good to keep that soil where it is and prevent more erosion. And then we're also going to leave some area for ponding. So the 6 inches of ponding, again, is like this rule of thumb, but really we know that water can't soak into the soil instantaneously. If it could, runoff would not be a problem. It wouldn't matter that we got rid of all of these pervious surfaces in our landscape. We need to give it a bit of time to soak in, and that's what that space is going to do for us. So 24 inches, 4 and 6 inches. Okay, finally, the common sense rule. This isn't really a rule, but I just want to point out that, you know, this is your garden, this is your yard. Is there room for adjustment? Of course there is. Really, it's up for you. So the first 3 rules that are all about, well, really the 2 rules that are about sizing, they're not hard and fast. They're generalizations. And actually, if you look at instructions from different sources, you'll find different directions even. The reason is because, I don't know, people garden differently. There's different soil conditions in different areas. People might have done their calculations slightly differently, but it's hard to go wrong following these rules of thumb. But there's room for adjustment. So we'll talk about that. But maybe you want to have a bigger garden because that example I showed you, maybe 30 square feet is just not what you're looking for. Why not make it 20% or 30% of the drainage area? There's no reason why you can't. We already have lots of gardens that are whatever size we want. So why not keep that trend going, I guess. Another good tip that I got is maybe you don't want to, or maybe you can't dig down those 34 inches or that 85 centimeters. It's kind of a lot, to be honest. So maybe that's another time where you want to make the surface area of your garden bigger. So instead of having it be so deep, we're making it wider, making it longer. So we're still having a spot to store water while it infiltrates into the ground. We're just kind of reducing that effort. You really need to make it work for you because it's not a cookie cutter solution. It's really up to your creativity and your sense of, you know, how you want to work in your yard. So yeah, drawing it out, taking some measurements, I think that's pretty common sense. And I'm going to move on. So on to soil amendments. What are we going to put back into our rain garden? We just talked about this whole, we're going to dig out 34 inches and we're going to put 24 inches of soil back in. Well, what are we actually putting back in here, and how's that really helping us? So it's going to be a mixture probably of soil and compost or possibly sand. Don't forget we want mulch. And I've included another picture of a rain garden in here. I love all these photos. Here they've used a lot of river stone in the middle. Again, that's just sort of their aesthetic choice. That is not part of the soil amendments, and it's not really required. So here's how we're going to figure out what soil mixture to use. Firstly, we need to know what is going on underneath the grass. So you may know from your own experience, just having lived where you are, how the drainage is. Maybe you've dug lots of stuff up in your yard before, so you might have a good idea. You can also pretty easily do a percolation test. So on this slide, and I'm sure you can come back to the video and watch later if you decide to build one yourself, but on this slide, this image is kind of showing you how you can do this test. But basically, you're going to dig a hole, fill it with water, and measure how much the water drops over time. So basically, how many inches per hour. And that is going to provide us with some pretty key information. We want to see if the soil is really clayey or really sandy, because they drain differently. So if you do this test, you can see a little picture of it on the left. There's a ruler or measuring stick in this little pit they dug, and the pit is literally the size of like a coffee can. It doesn't have to be big. So they dug this pit, they measured over time. Maybe it took 12 hours and they came back and saw, yeah, okay, finally drained. So if you're draining, I'm sorry that's in metric. I work in metric a lot. So if you're draining 30 millimeters an hour, or that is more than an inch. So an inch is about 25 millimeters. So if we're getting an inch an hour or even slightly less, we have sandy loam or sand. That's really, really well draining. So we're not really worried too much about needing to drain more. We just want to make sure we're going to add back some nutrients so that plants can grow really well. If we have kind of this satisfactory draining soils, so if we have, loam or maybe clay loam, we might be considering, okay, maybe we want to add some stuff in so it's going to drain better. And then if we have clay, we can still build a rain garden, but we really want to put some thought and effort into how it's going to work. So yeah, what does this tell us? Okay, really basically, and again, this is a generalization. If you have clay loam, clay, or otherwise just poorly draining soils, you're going to use a mixture of 60% sand and 40% compost. If you have sandy loam, sand, or loam, you're going to take, a good chunk of the dirt you just took out, mix it with some compost, and put that back. So really what this is telling us is if you have a lot of clay on your property, it's pretty hard to infiltrate water and have that, soak into the ground. It takes a really long time. Like going back to this chart, you're going to get, 1 to 5 or even 5 to 10 millimeters an hour. If you have that recommended 6 inches of ponding depth in your rain garden, and you're, only having 10 millimeters an hour or 3/8 of an inch, it's going to take quite a long time for it to drain. So we want to add some extra storage. We're going to get rid of all that clay soil that was in there. We can use it, say, on berms. We can find another spot in our property or give it away and just put back some sand and compost. So when we're talking about soil amendments, we're amending the soil for better drainage. So that would be adding sand, or to have more nutrients. So that would be adding compost. You don't really want to add fertilizers. Again, having excess nutrients is contributing to water quality issues. Compost can pretty much provide most of what you're going to need in this case. So here's some other thoughts. And this goes back to having maybe some really clayey soils, or back to these rules of thumb and how you can adjust them. Maybe your site is going to take a long time to drain, and maybe you're having a big area drain to it and you want to play it safe. So you can always make your garden bigger. I think I mentioned that. You don't have to stick at 10%, make it larger. You can make it deeper. You can add ponding area by adding berms to it. So those are some pretty simple adjustments you can make. And it's really just based off your preference and common sense and hopefully a little bit of research. Another thing you could do would be to add a bit of a drainage layer in the bottom. So maybe adding some sand or adding some crushed stone, and that can help promote drainage and act as this kind of storage layer. Yeah, and so then the last sort of ingredient. So we've dug out our rain garden. We've added soil back into it. Then we want to put some mulch on top. I would highly recommend getting triple shredded mulch, or this kind of shredded like cedar mulch, for example. The reason why is that when it's shredded, it's not really going to float away. Some of the, I guess, like ornamental or like, I don't know, show mulches, they kind of float in water. And you can imagine how that really quickly makes a mess. And then why, yeah, again, like why are we even bothering with mulch? I think part of the point of a rain garden is to have something that's pretty self-sustaining and pretty low maintenance. So you're not, necessarily need to be out there weeding every day. You're certainly not needing to be out there watering every day, and mulch is going to help with both those things. So building tools and tips. You don't really need anything special. I took this from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority's Greening Your Grounds book. It's pretty basic stuff. I do want to point out they have a string level. So go to the next slide. It's really important that the outlet, obviously, of your rain garden has to be the lowest spot. You don't want it flowing back to your house or flooding your yard. And marking off with a string and some stakes is a really simple way to do this, because eyeballing it is not going to work. So on to my favorite part is picking plants. And this is going to be really fast because it's all pictures, but I just wanted to say, recommend actually that you choose native plants. They belong here. They're great for pollinators and animals. They have really extensive root systems that's going to help infiltrate water and help hold soil where it's supposed to be. And yeah, they're adapted for local conditions. So if we choose plants that are drought tolerant, we're not going to have to water them as much. And there's tons of drought tolerant native plants available. So grasses, I'll just list them off. From left to right, I have included switchgrass, Canada wild rye, and purple lovegrass. Native grasses can have roots that are 3.5 meters deep, and the grasses in your yard, which is probably, I don't know, like Kentucky bluegrass, might only be 6 inches deep. So there's a pretty big difference here. When you're selecting plants, yeah, look for native and be aware, is it in the full sun, part sun, or shade? Those aren't specific to rain gardens. Those are really just, I guess, general gardening tips. So moving on to some shrubs, I think it's good to have a mixture in your garden. These are pretty low maintenance and pretty hardy. Again, like you're looking for ones that are drought tolerant, but can also handle periodic water or flooding. So left to right, there's St. John's wort, buttonbush, and red osier dogwood. I get a lot of these recommendations from our stewardship coordinator. So here's some more, and I just think this is pretty inspiring because at one point in time, I was someone who thought that native plants were akin to weeds, and maybe that's blasphemy, I now know, but actually they're really beautiful. They're really nice, and they're obviously really good for our local ecosystems and very practical. So I love how they look. I guess I can't stop talking about it. So back to wildflowers, these are just some really nice examples, and we even have examples of these at our Conservation Authority. They grow really well. If you go to a native plant nursery, you can get tons of suggestions. So how can you even get them? Well, firstly, ask for them by name at any nursery. That's important because they probably stock them, but they might not know what's native or not. And you can also find a native plant nursery. So I have some examples. On the next slide, I'm just gonna, this slide, I'll just throw up an example. This is from Natural Themes in Frankfurt. And they have a native plant catalog, which I think is great. So it's showing you shade, part shade, and they're telling you whether it's drought tolerant or not. And those are all things you need to know for your rain garden. Lots of places to get them. OntarioWildflowers.com has lots of good information. There's, guides for what you can grow in Ontario. And you can also reach out to your conservation authority for more info. So yeah, this picture, I just wanted to reiterate here, we're kind of coming to the end, that there is a lot of details in a pretty short amount of time. But what are the consequences of being a bit wrong here? I'm going to say the stakes are not that high. You might wonder why there's a chimpanzee. Well, just quoting my dad, he has this joke he always likes to say, whenever something seems overly complicated or I'm struggling with something that's actually, has a straightforward solution, he likes to tell me that NASA put a chimpanzee into space. Surely this isn't that difficult. And it's kind of funny, but it's pretty true. So, we don't need to overthink this. We're building a garden. We're doing something great. As long as we remember that we're trying to capture rainwater, we're trying to slow it down and soak it into the ground. It's hard to go too wrong and too off course. So how do we know we got it right? We have to try it out. If something goes wrong, it's pretty easy to make adjustments. We're working with soil. We're working in our gardens with plants. And I think it's fairly straightforward. So I'm going to skip through this because I think we're short on time. Common problems, I think if maybe some of those come up in the discussion. If people have any questions, I'm happy to talk about them. And I just want to talk about a couple of other ways and resources to make your property rain friendly. So one is rain barrels and rainwater harvesting. You might have thought when you heard more about rain gardens that this isn't a super new idea. Neither is rainwater harvesting. I'm pretty sure my grandparents had a rain barrel. It's not new, but it's pretty effective. It's another way we can capture and recycle water. Maybe you don't want to have a rain garden, but maybe you want to still have less of a footprint on your local groundwater. This is a great way to conserve. And then I just want to quickly touch on naturalization, because maybe a rain garden isn't for you, but maybe you've got some land that could use some more plants on it. We talked about how much our watersheds changed, and you can personally turn that around a little bit. So this is some pictures from the Natural Edge program, which I know you've all heard about, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. And there's also guides online. Maybe you're not a shoreline owner, although I'd say a lot of the plants and a lot of the tips that we shared from earlier in the presentation and that you'll get from these programs are pretty applicable universally. But there's lots online. So, these extension notes from Ontario on naturalizing your local park or backyard, these are all things you can find pretty quickly through Google. And I also, just as I close, want to say that you can get support for your project. So the BQRAP, the Bay of Quinte Remedial Action Plan, has their urban stewardship program. If you're listening in and you live in Napanee, Belleville, Deseronto, Trenton, or Picton, you can actually get up to $500. I guess this is the right slide for that, to build a rain garden or to naturalize part of your property. And you get access to support from them and the Greening Your Grounds workbook. If you are living on a shoreline, there are lots of programs you can access through our outreach and stewardship program. They cooperate with lots of programs like Natural Edge. There's kits you can get for that. There's lots of information on tree planting. So I would tell you to visit our website. And sources for information. I'm just going to flip through these. You can find lots online through a quick 5-minute Google trip. This Old House tells you how to build a rain garden. The TRCA has a complete guide for it just online. It's all free. There's 12,000 rain gardens. I had so many of their pictures. They have lots of information for you. So, it's all there for you to see. And just at the end, this is my last slide. I included a picture of a rain garden we built last summer. So I guess we kind of put our talk into action and built it ourselves. So lots of lessons learned, and we tried all of this ourselves, and it worked, and it's great. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I can figure that out. Perfect. Okay. So thanks everyone for listening. And I guess as I was talking, there maybe we've had some questions come up in the chat. So I guess I saw one from Colin. When waiting for tap water to run from hot to cold, why not fill a watering can? Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's fair to say that there's lots of ways to conserve water and to have less of an impact on the land we live in. So any little thing you can do like that is really good. Is there a communication that could be sent to residents about drought conditions? Yeah, so if it kind of depends on where you live. I'm going to assume you live in one of Quinte Conservation's watersheds. So actually, on our webpage, we have low water condition statements. So if you visit our website, you'll see them. And I'm quite confident that there's also an area where you can sign up for newsletters for that type of thing. And you'll get that information as it comes out. So we have these nice like colored indicators on our website. And also, if you're interested in learning more about drought, Mark Boone just finished a drought management plan, and that's also on our website. It's a long document, but a pretty good read. And Lawrence actually said that if you register for our emails, then you'll find all that kind of information. It's true. They're really good at updating you when anything happens. And at the same day they decide that we're in a low water condition, you find out as well.
I think another reference that you made earlier, Olivia, on the drought management plan strategy by Mark Boone, I highly recommend folks, if you haven't taken a look at it, I recommend it highly. You can just go to Quinte Conservation, look for the drought management plan or Mark Boone, and it should pop up there somewhere. But it's a very extensive document with tons of research that's been done by Quinte Conservation, and I think you'll find it quite useful.
For sure. I think it really puts things into perspective. Again, with the why should we care? Why should we do things? And then how does it impact us? You really get the big picture. If I remember correctly, there's also some pretty good tips and suggestions for what you can do. I focused obviously on rain gardens right here and some of the good stuff we can get from that and how to do it. But there's so many things people can and should be doing. And there's lots of reasons why.
Susan, did you want to ask your question on behalf of Colin about drought? You can put it in chat if you want.
Yeah, I think what this guy was looking for, he couldn't be here tonight, but he said he was looking for a bit more information on drought conditions, and I'm sure he could get a lot, obviously, out of Mark Boone's drought management plan. But just in case there are any other tips or perhaps websites that might have more information about sort of what to do about drought.
Well, if I can share my screen again, I can take you all there on a short trip. Just a second.
Do you want me to flip the screen back to you?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. Share screen. So all I did just now, I'll go back. I Googled Quinte Conservation drought conditions, and here's the link that comes up. So if you're just on our main page, you can come to watershed management, and all of these are alphabetical. So we're clearly in the section about drought information. So under water levels. So here you can see there's some information about low water conditions and assessment. And there's also some links you can follow to find out more information. So there's an entire page and a viewer for conditions, and you can also get low water messages. So I think that's the kind of subscription that we mentioned. And then, yeah, there's just tons of information. So I would recommend going to that page. Just that one link I clicked on shows you even more information. So you could definitely spend an afternoon exploring that. Yeah. And actually, while I'm here, since I have them up also on our website, I think I mentioned at the end some resources that might be available to you. Just come explore our page. A lot of this information that I would have loved to talk about, but didn't, talking about shorelines and naturalization, and some of the resources are all available, tree planting, all of these programs and why they exist. Yeah, we had our new update to our website happen a couple months ago, and there's just a lot here for you.
Are there any more questions of Olivia? You get off easy tonight.
Well, everyone's having a nap now. But thank you for having me. Thanks to Nancy for just being supportive. This was nice. It's nice to share with you all. I know you do some great stuff in our watershed. Even just with some quick emails to Susan and from talking to people, I know that there's already interest and knowledge in things like native species and in naturalization. I know you all, or many of you, already do lots at your houses. So hopefully I gave you some more information, and you might, I don't know, be inspired to try your own projects this summer.
Thanks, Olivia. Roger, I'll pass off to Roger Wales, who is a member of our steering committee. Assuming he's unmuted.
Don't assume too much. Now I'm here and I'm unmuted. So this has been very interesting. Thank you, Olivia. What I think most of all, it's very relevant to the place where we live. Obviously, the great majority of our audience would be people who do live in the watersheds of the salmon and rivers. So that makes it easier to pay attention. The other thing is that nowadays we're subject to so much guilt about environment and water and this and that. But this is, you focused on pleasure. Even if you're not a gardener, gardens are generally pleasant. So that also helps us to pay attention. One thing I like particularly, you mentioned encouraging natural species in your garden. And I heard a discussion once, a child said to a mother said to the child, "That's a weed." So the child said, "What's a weed?" She said, "Well, I guess it's a flower out of place," which I thought was very good. And another one, I like jokes, as people know. God was talking to St. Peter and saying, "What happened down there to all those beautiful flowers that I put there?" And Peter said, "Well, they're taken away by the urbanites." Dreadful trial. Well, what do? Well, they cut all the flowers down, and then they put down grass. And the grass grows, so they cut the grass, they put it in bags, and they send it away. And then they go to the garden store and buy fertilizer, which they put on their garden, which they then water. So obviously that's difficult. So you were telling us particularly how to look at the area that we have, and then to put the various things on that, getting a deep enough soil, getting the water not too much. Obviously, where there is a lot of urban development, you get roofs and runoff, and I think the rain barrel. If you say, "Well, I can't do any of that," the rain barrel is the least excuse. So that's good. You mentioned using what you have, which is another thing. You don't have to go out to the garden store, look around at what you have and see what you can do. Something that struck me just from around my neighborhood and that I've read online is elevated gardens. If you don't like getting down on the ground and weeding and constructing the rain garden, if you just build up these big square tubs and fill them with soil, right away there you've got 20 inches of soil, and you can stay pretty much standing up to put in whatever plants you want. So something else that we've done there. Do things that you can do. You know, the world is 70% water. It's a very big plate. You can actually sort of look up and calculate. Our bodies are 70% water. So it's a very important. It has marvelous physical characteristics, which I won't go into. And so another thing in terms of natural flowers, I noticed over the last 20 years, they used to clear cut the 401. Now, you know, they've found out that, well, if you just let the wildflowers grow at the side, you don't have to go through all that effort, and it's actually very beneficial. So we can see that too in our environment. So anyway, you've directed us to places where we can get much more technical and help with planning and so on and so forth. So that's very relevant, and that will be available to us. But just in the overall thing, it's been a pleasure listening to you. You pointed out the most pleasurable things about your subject, and so that will motivate us to go and maybe look at our gardens in a different light, and also point us in the right direction. So thank you very much, Olivia, for your time and continued work that you do.
Thanks, Roger. Just a quick reminder of our last event in this year's winter speaker series, although I think it's well into summer today. As always, a notice will be sent out prior to the event to register in advance. You can also go to either Friends of the Napanee River or Friends of the Salmon River websites to register for this final event. As I mentioned earlier, all the recordings from all of our speakers this past winter can be found on YouTube under Friends of the Napanee River. So many thanks to all. We appreciate you checking in with us tonight, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you again. And we sincerely hope that you and your families remain safe. Cheers. Bye for now.
Bye now.